Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the new CEN and CENELEC inquiry procedure. And this is coming to you live from CCMC in Brussels today. I'm here today with, well, first of all, my name is Matthew Tomlin and I'm the head of the publications unit in CCMC. And I'm here today with my colleague, Elysia Booth.
Hello, I am an editor in the Standards Publications Unit. I would also like to welcome you to this webinar. To begin, I will start to say in order to get the most out of the webinar today, we request that you turn off any email, phones, or instant messaging tools. Also, if you have any questions during or after the presentation, please use the Q&A panel shown here to submit your questions in writing and not via the microphone. We will cover as many questions as possible at the end of the slides, and a recording of the webinar and an overview of all questions and answers will be available on the CEN CENELEC website training pages. I will now hand over to Matthew, who will provide a little background on the new inquiry procedure.
Thank you very much, Elysia. So, here's a little bit of the background. Within CEN and CENELEC there is an ongoing focus on how we can improve the mechanisms and the procedures for developing European standards. And for this purpose there was the establishment of a joint CEN-CENELEC technical board working group. It was the working group number 7. And it was through this working group, through the input of the CEN and CENELEC members, that the new inquiry procedure was agreed upon. Now, we say new today in 2016, but in fact this new inquiry procedure has been in place in CEN since the 1st of January 2015, and in CENELEC it was introduced on the 1st of April 2015. And for those of you who are familiar with the procedures at international level, you will notice that the elements of the new inquiry procedure are based on the ISO DIS and the ISO CDV procedures.
Thanks, Matthew. And what are the key points for today?
Okay, well let's look at the key points. The inquiry vote is now a weighted vote, and in the CEN-CENELEC Internal Regulations Part 2, that's IR2, in Annex D, there is a list to show you how those weighted votes are apportioned for each country. In response to the inquiry vote now, members are to respond with either a yes reply, a no reply, or with an abstention. Members also vote on the implementation dates, so the date of withdrawal, for example. There is a reduction of the inquiry period in the new procedure. It's now reduced from 5 to 3 months. And depending on the outcome, it is possible to skip the formal vote. Now in CEN, the provisions for that are that the result of the inquiry is at least 71% of a positive weighted vote with simple majority. Further to that, should the technical committee want to skip the formal vote, a TC decision is required. In CENELEC, slightly different. Only inquiry projects having received 100% positive weighted vote will then by default skip the formal vote. And by skipping the formal vote we mean that we go straight to publication.
Can you tell us about the main groups involved?
Yep, that's next. So, who is involved? Well, we're going to be looking at the involvement of the technical committees, the CEN national standards bodies and the CENELEC national committees. These are collectively known as the members. For candidate harmonised projects related to European Union legislation and regulations, we have the consultants.
And of course, CCMC editors.
Indeed. So let's look at the first step. And here the first step is the submission of the draft inquiry text, which is the PREN text, to CCMC. Here, the technical committee is to provide the draft to us via the usual channels, e-trans in CEN and by email in CENELEC, and we require the Word, the PDF, if there are any drawings, and all those can be included, and of course a filled in electronic transmission notice, the ETN. And once we have received those,
once uploaded, CCMC, we will update our database. The project will be allocated to an editor who will perform an in-depth editing during an allotted time of 5 weeks. Once editing is complete, we continue to step 2, preparation and translation. At this point, CCMC will provide translators with a stable delivery of the text for a 2-month translation period. Here you see the database stage code. And during this time, there is a possibility of resubmission uploads in the event that the content of the draft needs to be modified, for example, to correct technical or editorial error.
Okay, we've just noticed that perhaps part of the slide is not visible, but we have just corrected that, so we apologize. So, having done that, having uploaded the stable delivery, we also can see the first involvement of the consultants. If the project is a candidate harmonized project for citation in the official journal, for such projects, the consultant will receive at this moment a request from CCMC to provide an official assessment. And CCMC manages that in consultation with the consultant, and a 28-day deadline is given. Also at this moment, when the translation starts after the editing, all the members will receive access to the stable delivery draft. And currently this is actually happening in CEN, and soon in CENELEC access will be made to the inquiry draft at this stage. The purpose of this is so that the members have a moment to begin the preparation of their national inquiry. Also during this, it will be possible for our members to request voting extensions. The extension of the vote can go up to an additional 1 month maximum. And also during this period, the translators might ask for an extension to the translation procedure, and that is in line with the current CEN-CENELEC translation procedure. So, Leah, let's look at the next step, which is step 3, launch of the 3-month inquiry procedure.
Okay. Once the translation period is ended, CCMC will upload the final draft to eTrans in the case of CEN inquiries, and to the FTP server in the case of CENELEC inquiries. For candidate harmonized text, we will also include a consultant's assessment. The database stage code will be updated to 4020, and we will open the electronic ballot on the e-balloting portal.
And following that, our members will then be able to conduct their national inquiry procedure. And then, once they've formulated a national position, after having consulted their stakeholders, they will then cast a weighted vote via the electronic portal on the electronic ballot. The members are also permitted to submit comments at this stage, and they are also obliged to vote on the implementation dates.
This brings us to step 4, closure of inquiry. At the end of the inquiry, the CCMC will issue the inquiry results. Approval of the inquiry will be achieved through a weighted vote and simple majority. This is in line with the Internal Regulations Part 2. And Matthew?
So, following that, the technical committee then has to consider the results of the inquiry. And in CEN, in order to skip the formal vote, a 71% approval at least is required, and then the technical committee is required to also take a TC decision by simple majority. Any results below 71% in CEN will mean that the next step is the formal vote. In CENELEC, only 100% approved inquiries will skip the formal vote, and that is a default skip. There is no need for the technical committee to take a decision. Any results below 100% mean that the next step in CENELEC would be the formal vote. And of course, if the consultant is involved for candidate harmonised projects and he is given a negative assessment, this would imply that regardless of the results of the inquiry, the formal vote cannot be skipped.
Okay, and what happens next?
Well, let's look a little bit in detail. And first of all, we're going to look at what happens in CEN when there's an approved decision to skip the formal vote. So, having taken its decision, the technical committee has to log this decision in the Projects Online working area. This is actually very new. Previously, the technical committee had to provide the decision directly via email to our colleagues at TC Mineres, but it's now possible to log this decision on the Projects Online working area. Once this has been done, the technical committee also has to provide CCMC with an upload on eTrans of the electronic transmission notice, and this will go into the folder 315. It's important for us to stress here that no finalized text is to be delivered to CCMC. The reasons for that is because following the CA7 decision, CCMC is responsible for these projects to finalise the publication itself. So the technical committee does not need to work on a finalised draft for publication.
That's right. So at CCMC, we will download the transmission notice and follow what we call the classic publication process, wherein the editor will finalize the publication using the edited draft that was sent for the inquiry. We will handle voting comments, incorporating any editorial changes. We will send the document to the TC for a 3-week proofing period, and once we receive final TC comments, we will upload the document for translation for 4 weeks. After this, the document will be published and the stage code will be updated to 6060.
And of course then, once that has happened, the CEN members, National Standards Bodies will then start the implementation of the published European standard at national level. Now, in CEN, of course, there are projects in parallel with ISO, so a specific note here for this. It is important to note that in ISO, there is the option to skip the FDIS, which is the equivalent of the formal vote, but the difference here is that in ISO it is a default skip of FDIS. So it is necessary for the technical committee at ISO level to pass a decision if they want to keep the FDIS. So with projects in parallel with an ISO TC, you are advised to maintain communication with the corresponding ISO TC if you are deciding to initiate a decision to skip the formal vote, or alternatively, if you wish the FDIS to be kept, it is best that you check with the ISO TC that this is their intention also.
Okay, and what about for CENELEC?
Of course, CENELEC. Let's have a look. So, as mentioned before, in CENELEC, only inquiries that were approved with 100% can skip the formal vote. Now, when that happens, from the technical committee's side, there is no need for any action.
Okay, and as was the case for CEN, the CCMC editor will proceed with the classic publication process. We will finalize the publication using the PREN edited draft. We will handle the voting comments. We will send the document to the TC for a 3-week proofing period, after which we will oversee the translation for a 4-week translation period. At the end of the process, the document will be published and the stage code will be updated to 6060.
And once that has happened, the CENELEC national committees, the CENELEC members, will begin their process of implementation at national level. Now, our final step, number 6, is that regarding the formal vote procedure. let's just cover it here. If the technical committee is to follow the formal vote procedure for their project, they have to draft the formal vote text based on the CCMC edited inquiry draft. In CEN specifically, a TC decision is required to approve the submission of that formal vote draft to CCMC. And of course, the delivery of the drafts to CCMC should be done prior to the deadline. The stage code for that is 4599. And again, we need the Word and PDF files if there are any drawings also, and of course a filled-in electronic transmission notice in order for us to enable to properly validate the project that's coming in. And once that has happened, Elysia?
Once we receive the text, we will update the database. The project will be allocated to an editor for an in-depth editing, after which the usual procedure for formal vote will apply. That is to say, CCMC will handle the translation procedure and launch the formal vote. Okay, so those are the main steps. Perhaps now, Matthew, you can take us through some useful links.
Yeah, so we have some further reading and some useful links to some of the documents that we've referred to. Firstly, the electronic transmission notice. Here we provide two links. The first one for the CEN members. There's the electronic transmission notice is available on the BOSS. And the second link there is for the CENELEC members. The electronic transmission notice is there available on the CENELEC website. Now, for the CEN side, when taking a decision to skip the formal vote, we've provided you with a formatted decision template that you can use in order to conduct the decision at technical committee level. And finally, some further reading. We have some guidance documents available. Again, one on the BOSS in CEN, and there's also one on the CENELEC website. The links will be made available here for you. So, I think what we should do now is look at have a recap of some of the key learning points from this webinar today. And the first one is that this new inquiry procedure gives the opportunity for a faster time of the standards to the market.
The second point is that an inquiry will now follow weighted vote principles.
Thirdly, there's a reduction in the time frame for the inquiry from 5 to 3 months, and of course there is a 2-month prior preparation period. So 2 months preparation period and then a 3-month moment for national inquiry.
And 4, CCMC will now perform an in-depth editing at the inquiry stage.
And that's important if you are deciding to keep the formal vote. You should draft your formal vote text based on the already edited CCMC draft that was submitted to the inquiry procedure. So, thank you very much for your attention. Again, if you do have any further questions or comments, then we do invite you to contact us. We have given you here the generic email address, so both Elysia and I are behind that email address. And the last thing that I would just like to inform you of is that we are running a series of webinars for standards drafters. This is in order for technical committees to become better acquainted with the drafting rules, and also for the possibility for technical bodies and CCMC editors to build relationships and work together on issues related to projects. So we've already started the first of the 6 webinars, which was a couple of weeks ago. The recording of that is available again on the CEN CENELEC training pages, and we have the second webinar coming up in April. Elysia, can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's right. The next webinar will be on the 21st of April, and I will be presenting this with my colleague, Cynthia Pelagi, and the topic will be on templates, structures, and introductory elements of standards. So we invite you to attend.
And the link in the presentation that you will have access to is given, and it will take you directly to the website and to the calendar of the webinars for you to then peruse through and hopefully join us. So that's all from us. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you.